This is what God said. Before I shaped you in the womb, I knew all about you. Before you saw the light of day, I had holy plans for you. A prophet to the nations, that's what I had in mind for you. But I said, "Hold it, Master God. Look at me. I don't know anything. I'm only a boy." God told me, "Don't say I'm only a boy. I'll tell you where to go, and you'll go there. I'll tell you what to say, and you'll say it. Don't be afraid of a soul. I'll be right there, looking after you." God's decree. God reached out, touched my mouth, and said, "Look, I've just put my words in your mouth, hand-delivered. See what I've done? I've given you a job to do among nations and governments. A red-letter day. Your job is to pull up and tear down, take apart and demolish, and then start over, building and planting."
So it was a usual Sunday, like any other Sunday, and I found myself in the worship area fluffing the river that ran through it. You see, that was a long time ago, and I was the associate of music and the arts, and my job that summer had been to create the rivers that the pastors were preaching on from various different scriptures. And I used these long, dramatic-looking pieces of cloth to create these rivers. So I needed to fluff, and I was fluffing when a young couple came in and approached me in the sanctuary. I could tell they were visitors by that deer-in-the-headlights look. I welcomed them to the church, and I asked how I could help. And we talked for a while. I was about to guide them to a class that they seemed interested in attending, when I can't remember which one of them asked, "Are you the pastor here?" In the moment, I laughed and I said, "No way." And I told them who they were. But that question, "Are you the pastor here?" began echoing in me. And the deep down answer, coming from a place I didn't know existed, was whispering, "Ah, but you could be." That, my friends, was the beginning of my further call to ministry. I was already the associate of music and the arts, had been working in that church for well over 10 years. I had been giving to God all that I thought I could give. That day happened when Sarah, my youngest child, who is now 20, was in my womb. And most of you know that I was finally ordained just last year during the 2021 Michigan Annual Conference. If you got the math right, you're right. It took me 20 years. 20 years from the time I heard the call to the finally fulfilling that call. And yet, all along the arduous journey, God was with me and continues to be with me, growing me and making me after God's own will. Now, I'm wondering, is there That resistance I'm hearing in your own heads right now? Are you arguing with God, possibly saying, no way, that's somebody else? Nevertheless, I am here to proclaim a revelation, the shocking news for today. God calls all of us. All of us. We are all called in one form or another to follow God's will. For some like me, that call led to professional ministry. For others, it's a call to be a prophet like Jeremiah. For still others, it's a call to bake cookies, to pray like warriors, to give rides to people who need them, to work in the food closet. Following God's call looks and feels different for each of us, as each of us are beautifully and wonderfully made. But make no mistake, my friends, we are all called. And so I'd like us to look at Jeremiah's call narrative and allow it to open us to where God may be calling us and may be calling us still. Did you hear that, what Michael told us? Did you hear how God knew Jeremiah even before Jeremiah was born? And yet it's not just Jeremiah who has been known by God in this way. The psalmist proclaims that we are all known in this way. So hear these words from Psalm 139. Oh, yeah. Shape me, first inside and then out. You formed me in my mother's womb. I thank you, high God. You are God of wonder. Body, soul, I am marvelously made. I worship in adoration. What a creation. You know me inside and out. You know every bone in my body. You know exactly how I was made bit by bit. How I was sculpted from nothing to something. Like an open book, me grow from conception to birth. All the stages of my life were spread out before you. The days of my life all prepared before I'd even lived one. There is such awe and wonder in those words. And yet God's presence doesn't leave us when we are. God continued with Jeremiah and promised even during this period of, I knew you, I consecrated you, I appointed you, that God would be with Jeremiah. There is comfort in this understanding, isn't there? And yet, Jeremiah is known as the complaining prophet. And what does he complain most about? God's relentless presence with him. This complaint sounds so familiar as we go back to Psalm 139. Is there any place I can go to avoid your spirit, to be out of your sight? If I climb to the sky, you're there. If I go underground, you're there. If I flew on the wing to the farthest western horizon, you'd find me in a minute. You are already there waiting. God is with us. Yes. To comfort us, yes. But as the prophet Jeremiah can tell you, God is also to call us into God's will. And God's will can be risky business. For the prophet Jeremiah, that meant much pain and suffering. Jeremiah knew that fear and intimidation are difficult to overcome. Prophets are people who have been chased down, ganged up on, lied about, isolated, excluded, denounced, and in some cases, in many cases, killed. So even as a boy, Jeremiah knew the cost of discipleship, of following God's will, and tried to resist that call by God. Yet God doesn't make a mistake. When God calls someone, God promises not to abandon nor to give up on those God calls. Jeremiah had learned over the years of being God's prophet that the temptation is to lose sight of the actual goal and get distracted by those who are causing us personal grief and character assassinations and personal attacks and sabotaging efforts. Their tactics aren't our responsibility to manage. I want to say that again. Their tactics aren't our responsibility to manage. Because God tells Jeremiah to not let them get in the way of him doing what God told him to do. To be a prophet is to stand no matter what. Stand in fatigue, in loss, stand in the conviction that God's voice can shake the foundations and remind the people to turn from their ways. A prophet must stand. And as you read the book of Jeremiah, something I recommend, the problems that Jeremiah faced came from the other voices. The other voices that were saying, do what you want, what pleases you, and God will do what you want if you just live right. Compared to the false prophet's easy messages, Jeremiah's message of pulling up, of tearing down, of taking apart, of demolishing, and then starting over didn't sound appealing. Yet the people of Israel could not see beyond the hard times to the building and the planting God had in store. So Jeremiah suffered and got irritated by God's presence, while at the same time he kept being known, he kept being consecrated, he kept being appointed. Grew into was the knowledge of God who called him and who partnered with Jeremiah. Jeremiah his ideas of independence, and though he complained about it often, he surrendered himself to God. He surrendered to God and to God's call upon his life. And here, where faith runs counterculturally to that prevailing thought of rugged independence, we surrender ourselves to God. And God chooses to use the gifts that are in us to direct our paths. This means that God works with us, with the best in us, to help us fulfill our calling and our potential. Jeremiah claims that God knows us into service and witness. God works within us to make us what we already are and to grow us into what we will be. Like I said earlier, take a look at the book of Jeremiah. I don't think I'm the only one who relates to this call and to Jeremiah's struggle. So the question that Jeremiah and you and I all face today is, how much of your life are you willing to surrender to God? Knowing that God calls each and every one of us. What is your call? Where is God calling you? And how much of your life are you willing to surrender to God in order to fulfill that call upon your life? And remember that God decreed, and what Jill reminded us is, don't be afraid of a soul. I will be right there looking after you. Remember how it took me 20 years to live into my call of becoming an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church? And believe me, there are still many days that I continue to complain like Jeremiah. But the thing is, I didn't just all of a sudden start living that call that very moment. Each day, God continues in God's persistent pursuit of me and of all of you, growing me, teaching me, surrounding me with people and tools I need to fulfill the call that God has placed on my life. It was a yes in the moment, and it continues to be a yes every single day since. Isn't it time to figure out what's stalling your movement towards God's call on your life? What more do you need to surrender in order to fulfill that call? Is it your fear of risk of growing in your faith, or of fighting against the voices that say something different? Is it the courage to go against those loudest and sometimes bullying voices? Whatever the complication, take it from me, take it from Jeremiah, take it from anyone who is following God's call. Don't give in. Don't give up. Keep journeying with God. Continue your partnership with God with a humble and listening spirit, so as to live a life that will delight God's heart. And can you just imagine what might happen if all of us worked with God more completely to fulfill God's call on our lives? God's will being done on earth as it is in heaven? Divisions would end. Peace would reign. Love would be the motive for all actions. Justice would run down like water, and we would see each other as siblings of Christ, working together to bring God's kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. Living into God's call on our lives and the life of this entire community of faith is about surrender and listening. There is a lot of uncertainty about how this works. Jeremiah and many of the prophets make it sound like there is this voice that comes in the middle of the night. And maybe for some, that's how it works. Most of us, there is a heart warmed, a persistent urge, or something that brings tears or hope. For you see, it's in all these ways that God, through the Spirit, makes God's will known for our lives. Because God knows us so intimately. And God is always, always on our side. So why would we waste another moment? Let us surrender to God's call. Let us as individuals and as this faith community live into and out of our call to partner with our loving God. May it be so today, tomorrow, and always. Amen.
Enjoy some fellowship and the movie The Chosen in the sanctuary on Wednesday evenings in August, except August 17th, from 6 to 8:30 p.m. Hosted by Jill Sestock and Susan Featheringgill, this experience will help us dig deeper into the Word of God. Simply show up and bring your favorite movie-going treat. Saturday, September 10th will be the last of 2 Meijer Simply Give Double Days. If we can raise $5,000 between the 2 double days, Meijer will match with $10,000 for a total of $15,000. Please give in this way to fortify the Food Closet Ministry. We are looking for some helpers to help fund and assemble kiddo worship bag kits. This project will take place during August and can be done at home or at church. Our goal is to put together worship bags to help children and youth engage in worship at their level. Contact Jill Sestock or the church office for all the specifics. Shelter Scarcity, formerly known as the Homeless Ministry, is in need of volunteers. If you have a passion for this ministry or just want to help, see Mike Skelton at the table in the narthex after worship. At the next parking lot service on August 28th, we will have a praise and hymn sing. In order to create the service, we need your help. On the table in the lobby of the worship space is a paper to tell us your favorite hymn or praise song or two. Take some time today to contribute to the praise and hymn sing service. If you have information you want included in Sunday Snippets, be sure to share it with the church office by noon on Tuesday.